Well, welcome everybody to a TwinSpires Grade 1 preview of a historic race at Aqueduct Racetrack, the Cigar Mile. James Scully, Darin Zoccali with you. And James, the Cigar Mile, we should obviously make mention of the horse that it's named for, previously known as the Naira Mile. But this race was a coming out party for one of the best older handicap horses that I've ever seen. Of course, the Mighty Cigar.
Yeah, absolutely. I forget right offhand, but I think it might have been his second
Yep.
win when he
Yep.
started the streak. He had won an allowance, and then he went to the Naira Mile, and then his next race, I believe, was against Holy Bull in the Dawn. But you're
Yep.
right, the Mighty Cigar. Once he switched from turf to dirt for Belmont, one of the best horses of the '90s.
Absolutely. It was a golden era of racing, the mid 90s, that older handicap division, and Cigar certainly the headline name of many of those great horses. An interesting field here today, James. We got a couple of 3-year-olds tackling the older horses going this 1 mile. It's a 1-turn mile at Aqueduct. And I guess we'll start with the horse here who's made the morning line favorite, and that is Zandon. Zandon has not been seen since the Pennsylvania Derby a little bit over 2 months ago, where he was a valiant second behind Taba, who would go on to run in the Breeders' Cup Classic. The interesting thing for Zandon, I'll just make 2 points and then I'll pass it off to you. Number one, I'm not sure there's a ton of early speed in here to set things up well for him in this short field. And the other thing with Zandon, while he's run great every single time running against top flight competition, starting to get a little bit concerned about his ability to actually pass the last horse in the stretch.
Yeah, those are fair points. And, the one thing about him is that I thought he ran a good second in the Pennsylvania Derby last out in late September. And, while no threat to Taba, I thought Taba ran a really great race that day, came back and ran third in the Breeders' Cup Classic. There wasn't really a race, I don't think, for Chad Brown to run him in. I think he made the decision then to point him to this race. And it's interesting to see him cut back to a 1-turn mile in this spot on Saturday, because I think Zandon, he's shown the ability up to 9 furlongs, but even in 9 furlongs, this his 3-year-old season, I thought, that was the very end of his stamina. And I thought that when he ran his best race of the season, his lone win this year in the Bluegrass, he came back off a 2-month freshening in that race, or nearly a 2-month freshening, sort of the same layoff into this spot, appears to be training forwardly. He's a horse that, to me, Chad Brown has been real selective with. If you will go back to when he started his career, he really hasn't had any breaks in his training, but he's only run 8 times. So he's a horse that the thing with him is that he's by Upstart, and I think if you cross Upstart with the right mare, you can get a true 2-turn stamina horse, and Zandon looks built for 2 turns, don't get me wrong, physically, but that damn side pedigree has Indian Charlie in there, and he might be able to mature and get better at longer distances. But I love the cut back to the 1-turn mile, because I think distances up to like a mile and a 16th, middle distances, are perhaps where his best at age 3 this year.
And he is coming out of the Pennsylvania Derby, which, of course, came back to be a pretty good race. Taba would come out of that race to run third in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Cyberknife lost a heartbreaker in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. So that race obviously has come back to be a bit of a strong showing. In fact, there was a horse that ran 7th who would come out of that race to be a next out winner as well. So he's certainly exiting a good race. Mind Control could be the controlling speed in here. I'm a little back and forth in him in this spot. He did beat Hot Rod Charlie in the Grade 3 Salvatore Mile, so we certainly have to give him credit there. He had overcome a little bit of a tough trip that he was probably not accustomed to in the Charlestown Classic behind the talented Art Collector. Was a good second last time out, but probably disappointed at Parks. He's a little bit in and out for me. He's the second choice in the morning line. I have a hard time just loving him in this spot.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm not sure if he's in the same form right now he was in that Salvatore. Obviously, he runs back to that effort that you mentioned where he edged out Hot Rod Charlie. I thought that was his lone real top class performance of the year. I thought that was a real questionable DQ last time. And granted, it was a 2-turn mile, and 1-turn distances might be a little bit better for him. But that Farmo Power came back and ran a bad 4th in a stakes race. That number, to me, at least on the Brisnet figures, looks inflated because that horse, Farmo Power, isn't that fast. And I'm just worried that he's just not in top form right now for Todd Pletcher. But a very classy horse. He has won 4 stakes at Aqueduct, but it's been a long time since the last one, way back in 2020, Darin, for Mind Control.
It has not been a long time for the next horse we're going to talk about in Double Crown, who just recently won the Grade 2 Kelso, going the 1 mile trip at the Belmont at Aqueduct meeting. It's interesting to note here, this horse on paper, you look at the odds, was a 42-1 long shot, but we can't really understate how much of a long shot he was in that race. It was a field of 6, and the next closest horse in odds to him was 13-1. So this was a monstrous upset in the Grade 2 Kelso, and we just have to ask ourselves, can he do it again?
Yeah, that's the real question. The thing to me is that he came back off that race. And I really think, first off, for Double Crown, I think the 1 turn mile is really, it just hits him between the eyes. You look back on his PPs and you see his 2 efforts this summer going a 1 turn mile. He ran a next second both times. And then but last time cutting back in distance, I thought it really, like you said, now he did get the favorable trip. He's got to run back to that effort, but I think it's an encouraging sign to see this 5-year-old gelding come back and turn in a couple bullet works at Laurel Park for Norman Lynn Cash, his trainer. And, it's a situation where it's not that imposing a field once you get past the 2 favorites we reference. So I definitely think like a minor award, like a second or third, wouldn't be too much of a surprise given his last effort.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to get a short field here as Obesos is reportedly going to scratch. So it is going to be down to a field of 6 runners, and he could be able to work out a nice inside-out trip. The horse I kind of like in here is Get Her Number, James. This horse got into a bit of a groove earlier in the year. He was a neck winner over Gunnett, who's a nice horse at Churchill Downs at the end of June. Then ran a really good second in the Grade 1 Bing Crosby at 7-1 behind American Theorem, who's a nice horse. Was probably a bit overmatched in the Pat O'Brien, where he ran into a field that was a surprisingly slow pace, I thought, for a Grade 2 7 furlong event at Del Mar behind Laurel River, who was a lot of people's wise guy selection in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. I then went back to Del Mar about 2 weeks later and won an allowance event. Seems like a horse that's in good form. He is shipping to New York for the first time, which is a bit of a question mark here. But I do think he's going to get a good, nice mid-pack stalking trip here in a short field, and I think he's a little bit dangerous.
Yes, and I'll say this about Get Her Number. You look at a lot of his efforts on paper, they're at 6 and 7 furlongs, but his lone stakes win did come in a mile and a 16th distance. I think 1 turn miles up his alley. I agree that he's very intriguing in this field. I like Zandon as my top pick, but I'll use Get Her Number in some multi-race plays there. And the thing with me is that he really, his best, he was going a little bit. He came after a couple turf races earlier this year. He ran a decent third in the Triple Bend. He goes to Churchill Downs, and I thought that was a really salty. That was a stakes race, had a bunch of, that was a high price allowance that had a bunch of stakes horses in it. Mm-hmm. He guts out an all out neck win. And then I thought he really ran a big second in the Bing Crosby. That was another step forward. Sort of the same pattern going into Saturday for Get Her Number, where he got a little bit of a freshening from Peter Miller, came back in an allowance race and was all out to win that race. He's eligible to keep moving forward in my mind. And I think that allowance race last time at Del Mar is a little bit easy to underappreciate, given that Ginobili, who's a multiple graded stakes winner and was second in the Dirt Mile last year, ran second to Get Her Number. And Forbidden Kingdom, who granted had been off form in his last 2 starts, I thought got back in form in that race and ran a really good half-length third. So Get Her Number beat 2 nice horses, 2 nice stakes horses last time. That's a sneaky effort in my opinion. And if Zandon doesn't get the job done, I wouldn't be surprised to see this 4-year-old colt run really well with Luis Saez.
Yeah, and I think as the 3rd or 4th choice probably offers good value here in this field of 6. Briefly, I'll mention a horse. I don't like him, but I'll mention because he's a part of the pace scenario, White Abarrio. James, just simply put, this horse has to prove to me that he can win anywhere other than Gulfstream Park. It's just a different horse there than anywhere else. His form has gone sideways a bit since the Kentucky Derby. He did run well in the Ohio Derby, but he's got certainly a couple of clunkers in there. He threw in the towel readily in the Pennsylvania Derby. I know he ran into Taba that day, and maybe you can make an excuse there. But going up against older horses here for the first time in this spot, it's just hard to get a good feel for when this horse is going to jump up and run well if the race is not at Gulfstream.
I agree wholeheartedly. I look forward to seeing him get a little break after this and maybe even cut back to 1-turn distances. I'm not exactly sure what the plan is next year, but White Abarrio still has a chance to get back on track down the road.
I completely agree with you. So it's Zandon for James with Get Her Number. Get Her Number for myself as the top selection. We're both a little bit gun shy on Mind Control. Those are the thoughts and the selections for the Grade 1 Cigar Mile at Aqueduct on Saturday. It's a great day of racing. Be sure to watch and wager with us at TwinSpires. And as always, thanks for watching.